Should oil be used as leverage to deter Russia's attack on Ukraine? A global battle is underway. The US is weighing up a new weapon of choice, banning Russian oil. But the shrapnel would inflict economic injuries across the world, and Russia could retaliate by shutting off Europe's gas. I'm Jafar Hassan, and today's newsmaker is the push for a Russian oil embargo. It is a drastic measure, but one that might be necessary according to several Western politicians. Global energy markets are holding their breath as the U.S. leads the way in considering banning the import of Russian oil. Bipartisan political pressure has been growing in the U.S., forcing Washington to seriously consider the measure. Fears of oil sanctions have driven up crude prices to their highest level since the 2008 financial crisis. Russia is the world's single largest oil exporter, selling around 7 million barrels per day, which accounts for 7% of global oil supply.
I'm all for that. Ban it.
Ban the oil.
Ban the oil come from Russia. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Biden has exempted, as you noted, energy. He's exempted oil and gas.
Right.
Oil and gas is where where Putin gets all of his revenue. We need to be boycotting Russian energy and leading the world in a boycott of Russian energy to cut off the cash to Putin. And number two,
The impact of an American ban on Russian oil would reverberate across the world. The U.S. can likely cover any immediate supply gap by dipping into its reserves. U.S. shale producers can also increase output, but only so much. There is no doubt that economies around the world will feel the pinch of a ban on Russian oil. Some a lot more than others. Inflation will peak, as any disruption to the global oil supply chain will impact global logistics through land, sea, and air. Some experts fear crude would quickly cross $200 a barrel as oil inventories continue to fall worldwide. Germany buys more Russian oil than any other country, and Berlin has so far rejected plans for an energy embargo. While the EU hopes to become less dependent on Russian energy in the long run, European importers of Russian oil are hesitant about a ban. Others, not so much. Australia's two refiners, Viva Energy and Ampol Limited, have stopped buying Russian crude, as has Shell, which announced on Tuesday it would pull out of its Russian operations. British Petroleum has also divested from Russian projects, withdrawing from a deal worth billions. Among others that have taken action are France's Total Energies, Norwegian energy group Equinor, Denmark's Ørsted, and Italian energy group OMV. But it is not as if Moscow is not holding any cards. Moscow has warned that it could turn off natural gas supplies to Germany through Nord Stream 1, a move that would massively impact the German economy. Russia is also reaching out to major oil importers like India, offering massive discounts in exchange for oil trade through alternative payment systems, including a rupee-ruble payment mechanism. Now let's begin our discussion today with an oil industry insider. I'm joined from London by Manouchehr Takin. He is a former senior OPEC official and an international oil and energy consultant. Thank you very much for joining us here today on The Newsmakers. Now, if President Biden does decide to ban the import of Russian crude oil, will the U.S. be able to cope with its domestic production alone if shale producers step up quickly to bridge the gap, for example?
Well, I think the world would continue, and the United States as well. The world oil market is interconnected. So if the price of oil jumps, it is an international price. And the United States, the people paying money to buy their petrol or gasoline at the pump in the US, they have to pay more. So the United States would not be isolated, and they have to pay more in spite of the fact that there might be no shortage of oil in the United States. And I think a simple answer to your question, yes.
Now, considering that America is the world's largest consumer of oil, how would an American ban impact the global energy market?
Well, the United States is not importing oil from Russia. You see, or all the world is buying and selling. There are different types of crude, so I wouldn't say that the US is not buying. They might buy something, sell something, but generally, United States is not dependent on Russian crude oil exports or importing it to the US. So it doesn't affect the US. But the fact that a source of supply into the world market, which I said is all interconnected, has been cut off because the ban imposed by Western Europe, United States, or Russia itself wants to stop it, whatever, to twist the arms of the European armies or whatever. If they do that, of course, that would impact the world market of crude oil. The price will go up. So the supply, the flows, oil is flowing in and out all the time into the market from different parts of the world, as I said, in a network which are interconnected and very sensitive what is happening. So if there is a reduction of oil from the Russian side, the price will go up and there will be shortage. It will take some time to find another source, and the tankers have to move, and then the crude and refineries which use this type of crude have another type of crude they have to find as the source of their feed for their refineries. All these things would take time, but at the end they can adjust. But definitely there will be a disruption, there will be, I wouldn't call it a shock, a major change into the oil market operations, and therefore it will impact the price. In fact, it will impact the price before actually there is a physical disruption, because the market, the price depends on the news and expectations and perception of those who buy and sell in the futures market on their screens all the time. So the price will go up as a knee-jerk reaction, as it did a few days ago. It went to $139. But when the world realized that it's not as bad, then it came down to what, in the 120s now in today.
This is certainly very interesting, but what about the impact of other major oil consumers like China and India? What sort of supply chain pressure do you think they will be facing if this ban goes into effect?
I think there would not be that much supply to them. If they are customers of Russian oil, they will continue, unless there will be an imposition of sanctions of ships, tankers moving, carrying Russian crude oil, that they might stop them and embargo them and so on. But in general, there will be a disruption of supply. And I think China and India are customers of Russia. They are not going to embargo it. They will continue buying it. And I think Russian oil exporters, the companies, government organizations within Russia, will find ways and means to transport and sell their oil to these countries. So there would not be. But as I said, when the price goes up, of course, they have to pay more, in spite of they might still getting Russian oil. So Russia will be happy because whatever it's selling is getting more price for it. But China, India, and others will have to pay more. It is not only these, there is Latin America, African, all these importers, consumers of oil have to pay more for the oil they are receiving, in spite of maybe not having a disruption. And that price increase, the import bill is serious and damaging for their economies. That is something which we have to realize.
Now, Manouchehr, it seems the Russian oil companies have already started to look for alternatives. For example, Russian companies are now reportedly offering India massive discounts of up to 27%. They're also open to a ruble payment system. Do you see this as a possible fallback option for Russia?
Well, that has been something which has been going on. In fact, Russian exporters have been trying in the last few years to do this, to become less reliant on transactions in dollar because of anticipations and limitations. So they can continue. And this is a big debate which has been going for many years. Should the world trade be based on dollar, oil included? And should the world be independent? And so the world has been trying to use euro in place, or have direct trades with India in rupees, with the Chinese in yuan, and so on. But it takes time. And there is an argument. Of course, there are both sides to any argument. that when you are free to buy and sell in the global market as an importer of whatever commodity into India and others, you are free to compete to get competitors and get the sellers to give you a best price. But when you are limited to pay and transactions in rupees or in Chinese currency, then that flexibility and competition with you as a purchaser becomes less. And so there are two sides of it. But in the case of crises and shortages, they can manage. Of course, they can manage, but the price will be higher. If sellers, Russia gives discount, of course, it will a bit reduce this unfortunate impact of the high price on the third world. It probably would impact it, yes. It will improve it, yes.
Okay, Manouchehr Takin, thank you very much for talking to us here on the Newsmakers. Now let's broaden out the discussion with our panel. I'm joined from the Spanish city of Granada by Mark Tomass. He is an instructor with Harvard University's economics department. In Innsbruck, Austria is Klaus Jurgens. He's a political analyst with expertise in German foreign policy, and in Bangkok is Steve Keen. He is a professor of economics and the author of numerous books on financial crisis. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today here on the Newsmakers. Mark, let me begin with you. Another dispute appears to be emerging within Europe, whether to buy Russian oil or not. Now, some countries have expressed their support towards this, but at the same time, some remain hesitant, for example, Germany and the Netherlands. Tell me, should Europe stop buying Russian oil? And if it does so, is that going to stop President Putin from attacking Ukraine?
Thank you, Jafar. No, I think Europe should not stop buying Russian oil and gas, because the brunt of this blockade is going to be carried by the ordinary citizens, the wage earners, those people who depend on their cars for transportation to places that public transportation does not exist. This will be disastrous for the poor people of Europe. So if you put all of the political motivation of this crisis aside, and you just think of the economic consequences of people, this will be disastrous for everybody from medium income to low income people. So I am against on that. From this perspective, I am against a ban on oil and gas imports. That said, even if such a thing is imposed, it will have no impact on the Russian elite's decision to move into Ukraine. I believe that the way Russia perceives the threat coming from the West far outweighs the economic consequences on the Russians themselves. So and you have to remember also that Russia is not the Russian political system is not similar to Germany or similar to France or even that of the United States. It's an autocratic system where the political elite does not really listen and is not sensitive to what the populace would say. So yes, there will be an impact also on Russia. There will be a reduction in the standard of living. There will be inflation, but it will have no impact on Russia's decision. And there is by no means Russia is going to withdraw after this invasion just because sanctions have been imposed on it. As we have seen, the Russian troops are advancing mile by mile, despite everything that we have been saying in the West. I mean, so we are in a situation where we have to go back a bit and see whether this conflict has been justified.
Okay.
You have to ask. Maybe later.
Okay, sure. We are going to discuss that in detail. Steve, let me come to you. Now, remember the last time I had you on my show, you had told me that the sanctions that have been applied against Russia are not going to cripple the Russian economy. Now we are talking about a possible ban on Russian oil. If that ban goes into effect, is that going to cripple the Russian economy?
Well, it'll cripple the European economy before it cripples Russia. And this is the point the previous speaker was making quite well, that Europe is far more dependent on Russian oil than Russia is dependent upon any of its imports from Europe. It's the time issue. If you don't have oil within a week, your transportation system stops. So you're forced to go import oil from elsewhere, and that will cause a huge spike. And as your previous speaker said, that will be imposed upon the poor predominantly, who couldn't afford their vehicles anymore. So I think we have to accept that in this situation, the West doesn't have a lot of leverage over Russia, and that is particularly so because it has an enormous trade surplus, which is something that's been building up for quite some substantial time. So even losing some of its oil exports isn't going to cause it to have to run off and borrow foreign exchange, for example. I think it's far better to start talking in terms of pressuring both sides to negotiate rather than thinking you can bring economic leverage over Russia.
Okay, now, Klaus, we have two esteemed, renowned economists on our panel today, and as I understand, both of them are not in favor of imposing a ban on Russian oil. Is this why, in your view, Germany is not approving this ban?
Well, hi, Jafar, and of course, absolute honor, pleasure being in the company of these colleagues. Yes, experts indeed. Now, this morning while preparing, I just took a look at the figures. The Netherlands and Germany import 50% from Russia gas-wise and 30% oil-wise, but the United States, according to different figures, between 3 and 8%. So Europe is, of course, much, much closer. But my two esteemed colleagues just reiterated, it will be the poor who will actually feel it. Now, I have prepared three very brief quotes, if I may. The German foreign minister, Mrs. Baerbock, said very, very outspoken and angering the Ukrainians, of course. She said, if the lights go out in Europe, it doesn't mean that the Russian tanks will stop from rolling. This is my own translation, maybe a few slight mistakes in there, but this is exactly the meaning what she said. Olaf Scholz, the chancellor, said he deliberately says that further sanctions with regard to imports of oil are basically outruled. The public opinion seems in Germany to support this view. And then I came across the former president of the Munich Security Conference, Wolfgang Ischinger. He said something absolutely remarkable this morning. He said, Vladimir Putin is not a madman. He is not insane. He is just being isolated in the Kremlin. He has no more supporters. Someone must find a way to talk to him to stop his aggression and war in Ukraine. So Ischinger basically says, let us try just this once for the last time diplomacy, and that words would matter. So I fully agree with my two esteemed colleagues. Only imposing sanctions and more sanctions, ultimately the poor people, the vulnerable people in Europe will suffer. I don't want to be blackmailed by Vladimir Putin either, but I think if Ischinger
Klaus,
is right...
if I may interject here, do you think Germany is being, sorry for using this word, blackmailed by countries such as the United States to do more in the face of Russian attacks on Ukraine?
Well, we have a new Germany. Ever since Angela Merkel, now we have Olaf Scholz. Germany has come a long way from semi-sovereignty to be a fully sovereign state, being the leading engine within the European Union, doesn't want to be lectured by no one, and particularly not by Washington anymore. Yes, indeed. I think a strong European stance vis-à-vis Russia is only possible if Germany is in the boat. And I think European partners are realizing, let us take the German viewpoint into account, that you can't just switch off oil and gas supplies, as the foreign minister said. If Europe is in the dark, who guarantees that Vladimir Putin doesn't continue on his heinous track? Yes.
Okay, Mark, let me come to you. Now, as I understand, this ban, if it goes into effect, it's going to be disastrous for energy markets and global economy. Then why do you think some countries are so keen on putting this ban into effect?
Because they are miscalculating. I mean, you have a few people who think in a sanguine way, but they are they're sanguine the sanguine thinking are miscalculations. I think they mo- why it is economics 101 for us. It's economics 101, as also the previous speakers have been emphasizing. The notion that these sanctions, it is so clear that these sanctions are going to hit Europe and later America before they hit Russia. So why are they doing it? I think it's just reckless policies. The reckless policies. They think that they want to show Ukraine. Most likely, they want to show the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian army and those militias that are fighting that, look, we are standing behind you. We are doing everything we can. We will soon send you weapons. They're probably on the way. Keep on fighting, because the aim of this crisis is to draw Russia in Ukraine and have it stuck there and have a second Afghanistan experience for Russia.
If I may interject here, Mark, if I may interject here, or perhaps these countries which are so keen on imposing this oil ban on Russia, perhaps they're thinking that after this ban is put into effect, the economic hardship in Russia will get so bad that the Russian public would turn against President Putin. Do you think that is a possibility?
Yes, that is a possible scenario in their mind. I think this is most likely what they are thinking. The problem, however, is, again, as the previous speaker mentioned, that Russia has a large amount of foreign reserves in U.S. dollars. So the notion that this will cripple the Russian economy in the short term is totally wrong. It wouldn't work. It wouldn't cripple the Russian economy. Russia can still maintain. It may have a bit of higher inflation, maybe a reduction in GDP growth, maybe to zero, or maybe to go into -2 or 3. But by no means that by no means that this will affect the dynamics of this invasion, because by the time it will have an impact, a severe impact on the Russian economy, Ukraine will be gone. I mean, Russia would have achieved all of its objectives of destroying the military infrastructure of Ukraine. This is what we need to think as people who care about the ordinary man. What was the point of this? Ukraine sooner or later is going to accept the Russian demand, which is to remain neutral. Russia does not accept to have a hostile power right on its border. And it's intervened, in fact, after its president announced that we are going to get nuclear weapons. Of course, they have nuclear facilities, which that threatened Russia, because they could start to activate these nuclear facilities and can get nuclear weapons. Now that was too much. It was crossing the red line.
Now, in the wake of this war, certainly many across the world are wondering, what does future hold for global economies? Steve, given the fact that the world is already recovering from the negative economic effects of the coronavirus pandemic, tell me, can the world really handle another oil crisis?
Well, I think it's going to be handling commodity crises for the rest of the decade, because even though this has been caused by something quite extraneous, a military conflict, we're approaching crunch times in terms of our impact upon the globe with global warming, and running out of mineral resources for the transition we need to achieve if we're going to go away from oil. So there's a whole range of minerals and basic commodities which we're running into very tight supply of, and this is just amplifying the problems with oil already, which will get worse. So no, I don't think there's the new normal will never exist again. It'll be the old normal can never exist again. It'll be a new normal where supply shortages and rising commodity prices, I think, are going to be the order of the day.
Now, Steve, let me ask you, what happens to be the title of your book? Can we avoid another financial crisis?
Well, we did avoid another financial crisis by having a credit stagnation after the last one. So the cause I was looking at in that book is no longer the major issue it was, because credit bubbles, except in asset markets driven by quantitative easing, are a thing of the past. What we have now is an ecological crisis. So we're going to a new one. And the ecological crisis will feed its way through the financial sector rather than the financial sector being the cause of crises.
Okay, very quickly, Steve, before I let you go, what could be a possible alternative for Russia at this point?
I think the only alternative is political. Even though the invasion is illegitimate and the force being used is illegitimate, there were legitimate reasons for Russia to want to have a neutral barrier between itself and NATO. Look at what America did when Russia installed missiles in Cuba. So it is quite common for great powers to say we want a buffer around us. The motivation for the Cuban invasion, Cuban outpost was the American missiles in Turkey. Taking them away is what ended that particular crisis. We need something like this now, accepting neutrality for Ukraine, partly whether Ukraine wants it or not, but neutrality is needed, and then Russia withdraws, something of that nature. I don't think you can have any hope of causing this through economic pressure on Russia.
All right, Steve Keen, Klaus Jurgens, and Mark Tomass. Thank you very much for joining us here on The Newsmakers. And thank you for watching. You can follow us on Twitter @_newsmakers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Jafar Hasnan. See you next time.